something was outside that cabin. I never saw it. I never want to. But whatever it was, it made damn sure we knew we weren't welcome. Last winter, my buddy Marcus invited me to his family's cabin up in the mountains. His folks usually went every January, but that year, nobody in his family felt like making the trip. So Marcus figured, why let it sit empty? He called me up, pitched it as a chill guy's weekend, and I said yes without thinking twice. We drove out on a Friday. 6 hours through winding mountain roads, pulling up around noon. I'd never been there before, so I had this image of some rustic little log cabin in the woods. It wasn't that at all. The place was practically a full-size house. Newer construction, multiple bedrooms, big living room with a stone fireplace. I was genuinely impressed. Marcus had been there plenty of times, but always with family. He'd never had to set anything up himself. So, figuring out the water heater, the breaker panel, the thermostat, all of it became a comedy of errors. After 3 calls to his mom, we finally got the place running. By then, we were both exhausted from the drive and the setup. We ate, talked for a bit, and crashed early. When we woke up Saturday morning, the world outside had changed completely. 6 inches of fresh snow had fallen overnight, and it was still coming down heavy. The roads were buried. We weren't going anywhere, but honestly, neither of us cared. We spent the day exactly how you'd expect. Watched TV, talked about nothing important, enjoyed the quiet. There's something about being snowed in that makes everything feel slower and more peaceful. That peace didn't last. Saturday night, we turned on a football game and cracked open a few beers. Nothing excessive, just enough to take the edge off. Halfway through the third quarter, we both heard something that made us freeze. A cough. A deep, unmistakable human cough, coming from right outside the front door. We looked at each other. Marcus shook his head slowly. "There's nobody out here," he said. "We're miles from the nearest house." I got up and checked, opened the curtain, looked through the glass. The porch was empty. Nothing but snow and darkness. We convinced ourselves it was the wind, maybe a branch cracking, maybe our slightly buzzed brains playing tricks. We laughed it off and moved on. After the game, we sat by the fireplace drinking and talking until well past midnight. Eventually, Marcus headed to one of the bedrooms, and I decided to sleep on the couch. The heater was barely keeping the cabin at 60 degrees. The place wasn't built for temperatures this extreme, so staying near the dying fire just felt warmer and more comfortable. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when Marcus's voice pulled me out of it. He was standing in the hallway, whispering my name. His face looked pale even in the dim light. "Did you go outside?" he asked. I told him no. I hadn't moved. He said he'd heard a door open and close. Not a subtle sound, a full, deliberate open and shut. He assumed I'd stepped out for some reason. But I'd been dead asleep. He walked to the front door and checked. Locked. Deadbolt still turned. I told him the cabin was probably just settling. Old wood, heavy snow on the roof, temperature changes. All of it can make strange noises. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully buy it. Neither did I, honestly. But what else were we supposed to think? He went back to bed. I lay down again and closed my eyes. I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every whistle of wind sounded different now. Louder, more deliberate. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes, trying to force my brain to shut off. When I finally opened my eyes and sat up, I felt my stomach drop. The front door was open. Not wide, just cracked, maybe 2 inches. But it had been locked. Marcus had checked it himself. Cold air was streaming through the gap, and I could hear the wind howling outside like it was trying to get in. I walked over, looked out into the pitch-black tree line, and saw absolutely nothing. I shut the door hard and locked it again. My hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I was about to go wake Marcus when a heavy thud hit the side of the cabin, then another, and another. Marcus came out of his room within seconds. "What the hell is that?" I didn't have an answer. The thumping continued, loud, forceful impacts against the exterior walls. Not the windows, not the doors, just the walls. Like something was striking the cabin with enormous force, but not trying to break through. We moved through the house, checking every window, listening, trying to pinpoint the source. It shifted. Sometimes the front wall, sometimes the side near the bedrooms. Sometimes it stopped for 5 or 10 minutes, and we'd start to breathe again, only for it to slam back even harder. This went on for hours. We sat in the living room with kitchen knives, barely speaking, just waiting. Right before dawn, it finally stopped. When the sun came up and the snow eased, we went outside together. What we saw made my skin crawl. The outer walls were covered in deep dents, long scratches, and scuff marks, dozens of them, scattered across every side of the cabin. They didn't look like someone trying to break in. They looked random, angry, like something was circling the cabin all night, hitting it just to let us know it was there. We packed our bags in 15 minutes and drove home in near silence. Looking back, we should have called the police. But when you're young and terrified and nothing makes sense, you just run. That's all your brain lets you do. I still don't know what was out there that night. Marcus doesn't talk about it. But sometimes, when it's late and the wind picks up outside my apartment, I hear something that sounds almost exactly like a cough. And every single time, I check the door. I still don't know who he was. I don't know where he came from. There was no car, no tracks leading to the road, just footprints circling the cabin and then disappearing straight into the forest, like he walked out of nowhere and went right back into it. This happened a few years ago. I was on a long solo road trip, trying to push through about 14 hours of driving to reach Portland. I never pre-book hotels on these trips. In my experience, there's almost always a room available somewhere, and I prefer to stop when I feel like it rather than stressing over a reservation timeline. It gives me flexibility. I can pull over wherever the area feels right and figure it out from there. That day, though, flexibility almost cost me everything. I'd been getting weather alerts on my phone since late morning. A significant winter storm was barreling through the stretch of highway I was on. Heavy snow, high winds, rapidly dropping temperatures. I figured I could outrun it, or at least push through the worst of it before nightfall. That was a mistake. Around 5 in the evening, conditions started deteriorating fast. The snow picked up. The wind started shoving my car sideways in short bursts, and visibility shrank by the minute. It wasn't quite dangerous yet, but I could feel it heading there. Within 30 minutes, every other vehicle on the road had vanished. I was completely alone on this narrow, two-lane highway, cutting through flat, empty land with dense forest on either side. Just me, the snow, and the growing dark. When the sun dropped below the horizon, I made the decision to stop. Pushing through a full blizzard alone on an unfamiliar road at night wasn't brave. It was stupid. I pulled over and started searching on my phone for the closest place to stay. Options were grim. The nearest towns in either direction were over an hour away, and a small motel about 15 minutes down the road showed as permanently closed. The only listing that came up was a cabin rental, just a short drive off the highway. It looked bare bones online, a handful of exterior photos showing a tiny wooden structure surrounded by trees. Nothing fancy. No reviews. But it was available for same-night booking, fully automated with a keypad lock. At that point, I didn't care what it looked like inside. I just needed walls and a roof. I booked it, drove another 10 minutes, and turned off onto a short gravel path that led up to the cabin. The photos were accurate. It was small, very small. I parked, grabbed my overnight bag, and hurried through the snow to the front door. The keypad code worked, and I stepped inside. The place was maybe 200 square feet, one open room. A bed against the far wall, a tiny wood-burning stove in the corner, and the single bathroom behind a thin door. No kitchen, no counter space, barely any furniture at all. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was how neglected it felt. A fine layer of dust covered every surface, the nightstand, the windowsills, even the bed frame. The lighting was dim. Just one overhead bulb that gave off a weak yellowish glow. It didn't feel like a place that had been rented out recently. It felt like a place that had been forgotten. But it had a bed, and it had a lock on the door. That was enough. I set my bag down, and within minutes of getting inside, the storm doubled in intensity. I cracked the window to check, and the wind nearly ripped it from my hand. Even with the outdoor light on behind the cabin, all I could see was a wall of white snow flying sideways so thick it swallowed everything beyond a few feet. I shut the window and locked it. The only heat source was the wood-burning stove. Thankfully, a small pile of pre-cut logs sat beside it. I got a fire going, peeled off my jacket, and sat on the edge of the bed. The warmth slowly started pushing back against the cold. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and told myself I'd rest for just a few minutes. I woke up maybe 2 hours later, not with a jolt, more like a slow, groggy surfacing. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I wasn't sure what. Then I heard it, my car alarm, distant, muffled by the wind and the cabin walls, but unmistakable. That steady, rhythmic blaring cutting through the storm. I sat up and listened for a second, hoping it would stop on its own. It didn't. I threw on my coat and boots, unlocked the door, and stepped outside into the blizzard. The cold hit me like a wall. I could barely see my car even though it was parked maybe 40 feet away. Its headlights were flashing, the alarm still screaming. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob as I walked toward it. Nothing happened. Pressed it again. The alarm kept going. When I reached the car and pulled open the driver's side door, I froze. There was snow on the front seat. Not a dusting from the wind. A small, deliberate-looking pile, like the door had been open for a couple of minutes. But the door was shut when I got there. Someone had opened my car. My head snapped up. I looked around in every direction, but visibility was almost zero. Just white noise and white air. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. And then I saw him. A figure. Standing motionless near the tree line, maybe 12 feet away. Just a dark shape against the whiteout. I couldn't make out his face, couldn't see what he was wearing. Just the outline of a man, standing completely still in the middle of a blizzard, watching me. I tried to yell something. Hey, who are you? What do you want? But my throat locked up. The cold, the shock, the fear. It all hit at once. My voice came out as nothing. So I ran. I slammed the car door and sprinted back to the cabin, threw myself inside and locked the door behind me. I pressed my face against the window. The visibility was so poor I couldn't tell if he was following me or still standing where he'd been. I couldn't see him at all anymore. That almost made it worse. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. It rang once, twice, then the call dropped. I tried again, same thing. On the third attempt, I heard an operator's voice for half a second before the line went dead. The storm was destroying the signal. I called 6, 7, 8 more times. None of them connected for more than a moment. I couldn't give them my location. Couldn't explain what was happening. Each failed call made the panic rise higher in my chest. Then the car alarm started again. I stood in the middle of the cabin, fists clenched, heart pounding, listening to that alarm wail through the storm. There was nothing I could do. I wasn't going back out there. I could only stand there and imagine what he was doing to my car, or why. After several minutes, the alarm stopped. Not gradually, it just cut off, mid-cycle. Either he'd found a way to disable it, or something worse. 10 minutes of silence followed. Heavy, horrible silence where the only sounds were the wind outside and the fire crackling behind me. Then I saw his shape again through the window, emerging slowly from the whiteout, walking toward the cabin with no urgency at all. Casual, steady, like he had all the time in the world. When his boots hit the wooden porch, I backed away from the window. Each step was deliberate, heavy. He walked right up to the front door. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm. Patient. Then silence, and then his boots moved. I heard them step off the porch and crunch into the snow, moving around the side of the cabin toward the first window. I pressed myself flat against the wall so he couldn't see me through the glass. He stopped right outside the window. And then I heard something that made every hair on my body stand up. He was humming. A low, tuneless hum, almost melodic, drifting to the thin cabin wall like he was standing right next to me. Just humming to himself in the middle of a blizzard, staring into the window of a cabin where he knew I was hiding. He moved to the next window, then the next, circling the entire cabin slowly, knocking on each pane of glass, humming that same low sound the entire time. He never spoke, never called out, never tried the door handle, and then it stopped. The humming faded. The footsteps disappeared. Just wind again. I didn't move for 15 minutes. I barely blinked. Then headlights cut through the storm, red and blue flashing lights. A police cruiser pulled up the gravel drive. I almost collapsed from relief. An officer stepped out and came to the door. Apparently, my repeated 911 calls, even though none connected properly, had flagged my location. Because I'd tried so many times without responding, they sent someone for a welfare check. I told him everything. He circled the cabin with his flashlight. The footprints were still there, pressed deep into the snow, going around every wall of the cabin, pausing at every window, and then trailing off in a straight line directly into the forest. No return tracks, no vehicle, no campsite, nothing. He checked my car too. Nothing was stolen, nothing was damaged. The man hadn't taken a single thing. He'd opened the door, set off the alarm, and left the snow on the seat like a calling card. That was it. The officer waited while I packed up and followed me back to the highway. I drove through the rest of the night and made it to Portland by morning. I've never stayed in a remote rental since, and I've never been able to hear someone humming without my stomach turning inside out. Because here's the thing that still keeps me up some nights. He didn't try to break in. He didn't try to rob me. He didn't want my car or my money. He just wanted me to know he was there, and I still wonder, how long had he been watching before the car alarm woke me up? He was already inside my house, standing in the hallway, waiting in the dark while I slept just a few feet away behind a closed door, and I have no idea how long he'd been there before I woke up. I live about 20 minutes outside of a small rural town, way out in the open fields, where the nearest neighbor is a distant porch light on the horizon. It's the kind of place where nothing ever happens. No traffic, no noise, no drama, just silence and sky. I moved out there because I wanted peace, and for a long time, that's exactly what I had. This happened a week or two after New Year's. Winter had settled in hard, and we'd been getting snow on and off for days. That particular night, the forecast was calling for a serious storm. Heavy snowfall, ice on the roads, dangerous wind chill. I was working in town until 9, but my manager let a few of us leave early around 7:30 because of how bad the weather was getting. The roads were already slick, and the drive home was dead quiet. Not a single car passed me the entire way. When I finally pulled onto my long gravel driveway, something immediately caught my attention. There were tire tracks in the fresh snow. Someone had driven down my driveway all the way up to my house and then left. The tracks were crisp and recent, not yet filled in by the falling snow. I sat in my car for a second, scanning the property. No one was there. No unfamiliar vehicle, just the tracks. I told myself it was probably someone who got lost and turned around once they realized it was a private residence. Happens once in a while out here. Rare, but not unheard of. I went inside, locked the door, made dinner, and settled into the living room to watch TV. The storm was really picking up now. Wind rattling the windows, snow piling up fast outside. I had the blinds mostly closed, but left a few cracked enough to keep an eye on things, though I wasn't sure why I felt the need to. About an hour later, I noticed a glow bleeding through the blinds. A harsh, white light pressing against the fabric and casting long streaks across the living room wall. Out here, there are no streetlights, no passing cars, no ambient glow from anything. If light is hitting your window, something is right outside your house. I got up slowly and looked through the blinds. A car was sitting in my driveway, headlights on, engine presumably running, just parked there, maybe 30 feet from my front door, pointed directly at the house, not turning around, not pulling forward, just sitting there. My pulse jumped. I stood at that window for at least 5 minutes, waiting for the car to do something. It didn't move. Whoever was inside just sat there, lights on, staring at my house through the snowstorm. Then slowly, the car began to reverse. It did a careful 3-point turn in the snow and drove back down the driveway toward the main road. I watched until the taillights disappeared into the white. Now I was genuinely unsettled. The tire tracks from earlier suddenly didn't feel so innocent. Someone had come to my house twice in one night, and the second time, they just sat there, watching. I told myself to calm down. Maybe it was a delivery driver confused by the rural addresses. Maybe it was a teenager using my driveway to turn around. There were explanations that made sense. I repeated them to myself like a mantra while I sat back down on the couch, but I kept glancing at the window every few minutes. I stayed up for another couple of hours. Nothing else happened. No headlights, no sounds, no movement. Eventually, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I closed all the blinds tight, shut off the lights and the TV, and walked down the short hallway to my bedroom. Scrolled on my phone for maybe 15 minutes, then set it on the nightstand and fell asleep. When my eyes opened, the room was pitch black, and the house was shaking from the wind. I glanced at the clock. Just past 2 in the morning. I'm a light sleeper. I wake up multiple times most nights. But this felt different. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't explain. Like the silence had weight to it. Like something in the house had shifted while I was unconscious and my brain was trying to catch up. I lay there for a minute, listening. The wind howled outside, pressing against the walls in heavy gusts. The house groaned and creaked the way old structures do in storms. But underneath all of that, there was something else. Something I couldn't quite identify. A stillness that didn't belong. I decided to get up and look outside. My bedroom window faced the side of the house, and from it, I had a direct line of sight down the gravel driveway all the way to the main road. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer out. Even through the darkness and the heavy snow, I could see it. A car, parked on my driveway again, maybe halfway between the house and the road. Its headlights were off this time. No interior light, just a dark shape sitting motionless in the storm, already dusted with a visible layer of snow on its roof and hood. It had been there for a while, at least an hour, maybe more, parked in my driveway in the dead of night with its lights off while I slept. My heart began pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I stepped back from the window, and the first thought that hit me was, check the locks, check every single door and window, make sure the house is sealed. I turned toward the bedroom door, and I saw it, a shadow, moving slowly across the thin gap of light under my bedroom door. Someone was in the hallway. Right outside my room, he was already inside. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My knees almost buckled. This person, whoever he was, had gotten into my house while I was sleeping. He could have been standing out there in that hallway for minutes, for an hour, for longer. Just waiting in the dark, maybe listening to me breathe through the door, deciding when to come in. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. If he didn't know I was awake, that was the only advantage I had. I moved back to the nightstand in absolute silence. Each step felt impossibly loud against the hardwood floor. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and opened the messaging app. I couldn't risk calling 911, couldn't risk him hearing my voice. I typed out a text to emergency services instead, praying that the text to 911 service worked in my county. It did. The response came almost immediately. Officers were being dispatched. Estimated arrival, 18 minutes. I was told to stay hidden, stay silent, and not engage under any circumstances. 18 minutes. I read that number and felt my stomach drop. 18 minutes is nothing when you're safe. When there's a stranger standing outside your bedroom door in the middle of the night during a blizzard, 18 minutes is an eternity. I sat on the floor between the bed and the wall. Phone clutched to my chest, eyes locked on the gap under the door. Every few minutes the shadow would shift. I'd hear the faintest creak of a floorboard. Soft, careful footsteps pacing slowly back and forth in the hallway. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, patient, like he had a plan and he was waiting for the right moment to execute it. Once the shadow stopped directly in front of my door. I could see the dark shape of his feet filling the gap, completely still. He stood there for what felt like a full minute. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Then the feet moved on, more slow, deliberate pacing. I watched the minutes crawl by on my phone. 14 minutes left. 11. 8. Each one stretched beyond reason. The wind screamed outside, and the man in my hallway kept his quiet patrol, occasionally pausing at my door, occasionally moving toward the front of the house, always coming back. Then finally, I saw them. Red and blue lights, faint at first, then growing brighter as they came down the long driveway through the snow. The flashing colors bounced off the walls of my bedroom, and I almost sobbed with relief. The reaction from the hallway was instant. The slow, careful footsteps exploded into a sprint. Heavy boots pounding toward the front door. I heard the door rip open, felt the blast of cold air rush through the house, heard shouting from outside. They caught him before he made it past the porch. 2 officers had him on the ground within seconds of his attempt to flee. I came out of my bedroom shaking so badly I had to hold the wall for support. Over the next few days, the investigation revealed the full scope of what had been happening. This wasn't a random break-in. This man had been watching me for weeks, possibly longer. On his phone, they found photographs of me, taken from a distance, taken in public, taken outside my own home. Some of them showed me sitting on my porch at night, completely unaware, while he stood somewhere out in the black, empty field in front of me, invisible in the darkness. Close enough to capture my face on a phone camera. I had never seen him before, never spoken to him, had no connection to him whatsoever. He was a complete stranger who had chosen me for reasons I may never fully understand. In his car, officers found a loaded firearm. They also found a bag containing rope, zip ties, duct tape, and a few other items that I won't describe in detail. The kind of collection that tells you exactly what someone is planning, without them ever having to say a word. If I had opened that bedroom door, if I had walked into that hallway to check the locks like I'd planned, I would not be telling this story. I moved out of that house within the month. Sold it at a loss. I don't care. Some nights, when I'm lying in bed in my new apartment in town and I hear a floorboard creak in the hallway outside, my whole body goes rigid and my eyes shoot straight to the gap under the door. Because now I know something most people never have to learn. Sometimes the danger isn't trying to get in. Sometimes it's already inside, standing just a few feet away, waiting in the dark, listening to you sleep.